All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here and joining us today on a really beautiful Monday. So a little bit of housekeeping. As always, we want to give a huge thank you to our friends at the Beverly Public Library who make putting on these programs possible and also provides our refreshments, which we really appreciate. Restrooms are right down the hall to the
left.
Yeah, that's an L. Perfect. Someday I'll actually be able to tell which direction they're in. So if you ever need to pop out, that's where they are, so you can get right on back in time for the presentation. That said, we're really, really happy to have with us here for the second time Maggie Neal to talk about. In your first presentation, we were talking about the same family for the most part, but actually kind of what Maggie was talking about casually a few minutes ago about what was going on in the 1600s with the first families coming over and their preoccupations and their stories. So we're moving forward very appropriately given the huge revolution anniversary that we have going on right now and a lot of different cool local events you guys have probably been seeing going on. So we're going to get a chance to dive a little bit deeper into that history through the lens of a prominent merchant family and how it kind of connects to our local history today. So with that, let's get started.
All right. Thank you, Graham, for that nice introduction. Today I'll give a 15-minute talk about a wealthy merchant family from Norwich, Connecticut that will lose a lot of their wealth during the war era. There are three parts, basically: the family and kin backstory, the events and actions of 1775, just the highlights though. We don't have time for all of it. And the family, there's going to be a family tragedy that occurs at the end of the year. It's based on a fantastic wealth of primary sources available in archives and online. I've been studying them and their family line for years, and I'm almost done with the first draft of a book about them. Finally, part of this presentation includes a description of a family tragedy that includes a discussion of depression and a brief mention of suicide. So, without further ado, I'm going to keep going here. Boom. Okay. So, does anyone recognize this house? Yes. It's on Hale Street. It is the Robert Thorndike house, and it's a merchant's house. It says sailor on it, or merchant, or mariner, but he would have been a merchant, and he was. It says mariner on there, but he, to be sure, was storing goods in that big upper second floor, as you can see, with the gambrel roof. And what we're talking about now, I might need that microphone, Graham, in a minute. I don't know, because
I got it.
We're talking about the merchants. They're going to drive in the years up to the revolution itself. It's not really the founding fathers yet. And we're talking about the Atlantic world in the age of sail. And what that means is like slavery and sugar, and the whole like sugar colonies. Yeah, maybe I could use that. Okay. Sorry. I like to move around. Thanks. Okay.
The lights down?
Yep.
What? Thanks. Okay, so what they're doing is they're participating in the Atlantic world, everybody, including Robert Thorndike here. And I'm just using that as an example because we're going to be talking about the Huntingtons of Norwich, Connecticut. And Norwich is sort of similar to Beverly in a way. It's about the same size. It has access to the water. And all these towns like Beverly, Newburyport, Boston, Providence, Norwich, and more, they're all full of merchants and traders that are dependent on this Atlantic trade world that is based on slavery and cruel, harsh conditions in the West Indies, producing sugar and molasses. And the run-up to the Revolution, starting perhaps with the Stamp Act of 1765, Sons of Liberty's groups will spring up in Massachusetts and Connecticut. And then as we get closer to the Revolution in 1774, right after the Boston Tea Party, the British are really going to come down hard with the Intolerable Acts, where they basically are going to shut Boston off from the world. And committees of correspondence will be created to correspond with different towns across across the whole of the colonies, from Maryland to South Carolina to New York State to Connecticut and Massachusetts, of course. Now today we're here to talk about the Jabez Huntington family. The Huntingtons were merchants all throughout the 16th and 17th century. This is Jabez Huntington on the right. This is one of the only portraits of his generation we have. This was done in 1777 by John Trumbull, who was related to him through marriage. His sister married his son Jedediah. And it's the first portrait that was done by John Trumbull, the Revolutionary War era artist. And I personally think, although his Revolutionary War paintings depicting the events of the Revolutionary War era are fantastic, even if they are dramatized, he did a great job with portraits. I feel like I know this man. And he's looking out towards the harbor, New London. He's going to be the sole major general for the Connecticut militia during the war up until 1779, when he has to retire because he has a lot of anxiety and stress and he can't do it anymore. He's named for his maternal grandfather, who came from Ipswich, is a Perkins. So I don't know if you know that name. It's a big name, Perkins in Ipswich. So there's another connection to the North Shore here. He's educated at Yale. So he will inherit a lot of money over his lifetime, but it will come at a cost. Kind of like George Washington is similar to this. A lot of death in his immediate nuclear family. So he will kind of be the sole heir to a lot of land in Connecticut and other places. He's also a professional, very experienced merchant. It runs in his family line, from him all the way down to his ancestors from Norwich, England. 1745 will be a terrible year for him. He will lose his wife in childbirth, and then his first wife in childbirth, and then his father to yellow fever. He's a merchant politician, which is important. These are the guys that are going to be, they're called radicals, and they are the ones that are they're not loyalists, and they're increasingly agitated by the British rules, acts, and laws. He's part of the New London County, Connecticut Standing Order, meaning there's only a few families that really control that county politically, and eventually all of Connecticut. So one of the things I like to talk about is one of his first actions in defiance of King George and Parliament is the Stamp Act walkout in 1765 in the Connecticut General Assembly, where he and Jonathan Trumbull, the future colonial governor, will actually just walk out of the Hartford chamber and in defiance. They will not sign off on the Stamp Act to enforce it in their towns. They're not going to sign off on it. 7 of them walked out, 3 of them signed it, and eventually it was, I forget what the word, they canceled it, but then it came back. I mean, we know the 1760s and 1770s are full of a ton of acts and laws and rules that the British are staging against the colonials and the merchants. He's an importation merchant, and he's one of the wealthiest men in Connecticut at this time. This is his house. It's still standing. It's in Norwich Town, Connecticut. Has anyone ever been to Norwich? No. If you're ever interested in Connecticut history, you need to go there. It's chock full of history. It's going to be a supply depot during the Revolutionary War, and especially during 1776, when things are really dire. So this still stands. And these are some of the pieces of furniture that are associated with the house in the Huntington family of this era. The desk on the left is at the Chicago Museum. It's a Chippendale-style desk, probably made of mahogany, by Felix Huntington, a distant cousin. And on the right is another Felix Huntington chair with the owl's eyes chair with original Spanish leather. Those are in existence. I think the one on the right is at the Lyman Allen Museum in New London. Elizabeth Backus Huntington was Jabez's, the patriarch. So that's Jabez. His first wife is Elizabeth. Now, of course, this isn't a picture of her. This is a picture of Isaac Backus. Does anyone know who he is? Oh, come on. He looks just like her. He's kind of got angel wings for his wig. This is Elizabeth's brother, and he's one of the leaders of the Baptist Church movement in American history. He's an important man in religious history in America. The thing to know about Elizabeth, unfortunately, is there's not a lot to know about her. She's going to die in childbirth in 1745 after women would die not during childbirth but 10 days after or so from sepsis. This happened quite frequently. Childbirth, as we all know, is a dangerous endeavor, and most men can expect to be married at least twice because of the rigors or the danger of childbearing. She's from a family of separatists, however, and Norwich was a seat for separatism in Connecticut. I need to learn more about that, but it was Congregationalist, to be sure. Connecticut was Congregationalist. It was a state-backed religion until 1818. But but there were separations from the church over time. She makes a good marriage. She's the mother to Jedediah Huntington. He's perhaps the most famous, and he would distinguish himself during the Revolutionary War. And she's also a mother to Andrew, his second brother. Here's Jedediah. Has anyone ever heard of him? No. So he's going to become a trusted aide of George Washington throughout the war. Of course, like everybody seems to have been a trusted aide of George Washington, but after all, it was a long war, right? He was, like all colonials in Connecticut and New England, typically you were named for a deceased family member. And he was educated in Canterbury, Connecticut, nearby with Benedict Arnold. They're both from Norwich. Benedict Arnold, strange dude.
We've heard of him.
Yeah, trust me, the people of New London have heard of him too. And he's demonstrates a lot of impulsive behaviors early on in his childhood that some people remembered. Jedediah, though, this is another painting by John Trumbull, his brother-in-law. It's a miniature done after the war. It's part of the Yale collection. Very militarily ambitious, and the leader of his generation of Huntingtons and their wives and brothers-in-laws. He's just incredibly ambitious. He gets a regiment in 1774, we'll call it. No military experience. It's all about can your dad outfit the regiment? And of course, there were men who had fought in the French and Indian War, like this guy named Joel Clark. And can you imagine? You've been traipsing around fighting the French and Native Americans, and then this guy gets the head of the regiment. He gets to be colonel, and you still have to be a major. This kind of stuff happened all the time. But he married Faith Trumbull, the daughter of the future governor, in 1766, right when the Trumbull family is experiencing a lot of financial hardship. But they both make a good marriage, and that was so important to merchants, because if your son or daughter married a guy that was insolvent or going to be insolvent, that would reflect really poorly on you. Your reputation was everything in these days. Andrew Huntington, he's the lesser known of the Huntington sons. They're all going to distinguish themselves during the war. He has a sickness. Well, first, he's named for another deceased uncle, doesn't go to college, has 2 children with Lucy Coit from nearby New London. Exempt from military duty in 1775, this is a letter right here on your left, Jonathan Trumbull's exemption, listing that he had 2 able-bodied physicians say that he's unfit for duty. It was all about duty, and he did have a sickness as a late teenager that's documented in a couple letters by Jedediah, who was a very good letter writer, that something, probably smallpox, or it could be any disease that a teenager could get too. Like, just because you were past your childhood years doesn't mean you might not get sick with something else in your later years. But once you made it past your teenage years, it didn't matter. Yellow fever, the grandfather was killed by yellow fever as a 40-year-old. It's just disease is all around you. But he's exempt from military duty, but he will become a very hard-working commissary for the Continental Army. And already in 1775, he's supplying his brother's regiments and other Connecticut regiments with provisions. They're just expert provisioners. I'll talk about that in a minute. This is not a picture of the Huntingtons. This is a picture of the Peel family by Charles Wilson Peel. I just like it because it shows women and a multi-generational picture that it is. He's another famous Revolutionary War era artist. And I like it because it shows hairdos. Hairdos, and they're not powdering their hair yet. But we don't have a lot of pictures of the Huntington women of this era. Hannah Williams is the second wife of Jabez, because remember his first wife died in childbirth, unfortunately. She's a minister's daughter. Merchants' children would only marry people of the ministerial class or the merchant class of equal or better rank. That's just how it worked. Rank was extremely important. If your daughter married a farmer who was coming into the store to like trade and they develop a relationship, that's not a good thing. You know, it's a world of rank and aspirations, aspirational wealth. She marries Jabez in the summer of 1746. He married very quickly afterwards. That men and women, for that matter, especially men, had to marry if they had little kids. They had to have someone to take care of their children. They eventually have 6 children together. One will die at age 10, and 2 letters of hers survive, and they're at Yale. And they surround the illness of her daughter-in-law, Faith Trumbull Huntington, in the summer of 1775. So this is an important slide. This picture is a little fuzzy. What we have on the right are enslaved people from Africa working in the West Indies in the terrible conditions of the sugar cane fields. And it was a horrible process. They're not only out in the hot sun, as you can see the overseers are underneath a palm tree. They are also going to be working in hot sugar mills, processing sugar and also molasses. Molasses was shipped all the time up to New England to make New England rum. New England rum would be drunk by the soldiers of the Continental Army, as well as average American people who would go to their local stores and get New England rum, not West Indies rum. West Indies rum would only be for the wealthy. Supposedly Rhode Island had the best rum too, by the way. So the Huntingtons and Sons, he's got a perfect situation there. He's got his daughters, his sons. His daughters will make advantageous marriages. They're all working for the common good. The sons are also have their own side shows too, like their own side businesses. But they're exporting cattle, horses, land, pork, barrel staves, beef, salted and brined beef and pork, and they are shipping that down to feed the poor enslaved people working themselves to death. To be honest with you, it's horrible conditions, and they're enabling this cruel system to happen. So don't be confused. The Huntingtons have retail stores at the wharf in Norwich and up at the Norwich Town Green. They have at least 1 or 2 distilleries, again, down at the wharf at the head of the Thames River and up top in Norwich Town. The Norwich area is very, very vertical and rocky. They have the wharves. One of the sons will kind of be in charge of the wharves. What else? And then there are trading all around the Atlantic world, from London all the way down to Grenada. Enslaved work, they will have a few enslaved workers themselves in Norwich. Those will enable them to do the paperwork and the other job, the political roles. And so if you can do that and you have a couple of enslaved workers for you, then you don't have to do that work yourself. So, and of course, there would have been enslaved women too working for the Huntingtons. I know of a few of them. We're going to talk about one in a second. They're doing all the hard labor that is still required, obviously, in 18th century Connecticut to live. What else? Let me see if I'm missing anything. So it's quite a large operation from soup to nuts. They're doing everything from probably making barrels in the wintertime to constantly shipping out their vessels with their trusty captains all over the Atlantic world. By 1770s, things are getting hotter with regard to the British, more control by the British, controlling of their trade. They have to do everything through British custom officials in Boston and New York. Jedediah will join the Sons of Liberty and the Committees of Correspondence. He's a real leader of the area. In June of 1774, the leaders of Norwich declare their support for Boston. They declare that in a town meeting that's run by Jabez, the patriarch, and his cousin Hezekiah Huntington, and others, including Christopher Leffingwell. He's another leader of Norwich. Norwich is a real thriving inland port of Connecticut. It's one of the highest tax towns in Connecticut, up there with New Haven and Hartford. And it's important to remember that it's the towns that are driving the revolution, not the founding fathers yet. And that was pointed out this summer to me by a man named Donald Johnson from North Dakota State University, and he gave a great talk online through the Massachusetts Historical Society. And if you want to dig into that, just probably go to their website. This is a picture of a Liberty pole in the Bowling Green of New York City. That was their town green. There were Liberty poles like this all over New England. The Liberty Tree Mall. There would have been a Liberty tree or pole somewhere in that Danvers area. This is an era of, I think Liberty poles might have been hoisted up as early as 1765. And I would need to do more research on that. But, I actually have evidence of one being erected on the Norwich Town Green in 1770. You can barely see it, July over there of 1774. Joshua Huntington, one of Jabez's sons, is going to pay a guy named Guy Brooks, his handyman, 5 shillings to raise a Liberty pole.
Is there a reason that his name is spelled T-U-N, or is that
T-U-N. Oh, yeah, because a lot of times people of this era spelled everything phonetically, which is fascinating. I love that you asked that question. Slaughterhouse becomes slaughterhouse. You can actually tell how these people talked. It's not spelled slaughterhouse. That's how we would pronounce it. It's in the one of the invoices. It's slaughterhouse. You see a name like Forbes. That's a common name in New England. Sometimes it's spelled Forbes, F-O-B-E-S, because that's how they were saying it. Forbes. Mr. Forbes, get your bottom to the meeting. All right, so we'll keep going because I can't see what time it is.
We're doing good.
Okay, Joshua Huntington, he's the middle son. Again, he's got military ambitions, but not as much as Jedediah or his younger brother Ebenezer. He's running the wars and the vessels. He marries a prominent kin named Hannah Huntington. A lot of Hannahs in Norwich too. That's a very popular name. I love studying naming patterns. It's very interesting and how people spoke.
It is in Beverly as well.
Hannah. Yeah, that's true. The ship Hannah. I went on that Presbyterian tour. I highly recommend it. Beverly, of course, will be a hotbed of Presbyterian, as is New London and Norwich. In fact, that's what keeps the Continental Army going, is the Presbyterian, because they cannot get powder. That is a common theme in 1775 and 1776. But I digress a little bit here. But again, it's all about who you marry. Once you marry somebody like Colonel Chester, that's his brother-in-law, you're part of a bigger kin group now. And you have more connections. It's all about connections, and hopefully, you're going to get wealthier because of these good connections that your daughter or son made by marrying Faith Trumbull or Lucy Coit. So, by 1775, he goes off just like everybody else in April of 1775. They rush up, the Connecticut guys rush up to help their Massachusetts brothers, and he will be in the Cambridge camp with Colonel Chester, which some people went and looked at the map. We got Boston right here. Cambridge is over here. This is where George Washington was, but there were some more camps outside of Cambridge in what we would call Somerville and Medford now. So we can assume Joshua is up there. His military record is kind of hard to follow. He went back and forth, and eventually he just stayed in Norwich. It's really just Jedediah and Ebenezer that will last the whole war. Let's keep going. That's one of his homes. Every time one of Jabez's children got married, they got a home built for them. And again, still, you can see it. I'm going to try to get in there when I go back to Norwich, hopefully in April. Ebenezer is the fourth son. He's a very interesting guy. He's a hothead. I don't know who did this painting. This is after the war. He was a military guy the whole way through, up and through the War of 1812, I believe. Maybe not 1812, but there were more skirmishes after the war with the French and the I don't even know, but he's a military guy through and through. In fact, he runs off from Yale in 1775 in April, just like everybody else. And there's this big drama about, is he going to get his degree or not? And then I think Harvard, once he's up in Massachusetts, Harvard decides to just give him a degree because Yale is balking at it. It's so dumb. One of the things we know is a lot of these guys would have to come home during the war and convalesce. Then he was ill in the summer of 1775, and we know that because his sister-in-law, Faith, wrote about it in one of her 11 surviving letters that I'm going to talk about in a minute. He gets embroiled in a promotion controversy in 1775 where the people in his regiment are upset that he's getting promoted. And they complain to the general, and the general has to go to George Washington to talk about this stuff. And George Washington is like, what? Stop. Like, I'm trying to run a war and we don't have any powder or flour. And this kind of stuff happened all the time. In fact, it happened to George Washington when he was this age. When you're in the military, it must be so frustrating to see some like slacky, like lackadaisical guy who's got money, or it's all about who you are instead of, in other words, it's not a meritorious process necessarily. But he was a committed military person though, and brave, I guess, and he was in a lot of the different battles, so he would progress. But when the war starts, he's only 21 years old and he's expecting to be a captain already. And again, like I said, there's a whole controversy in, I think, the late summer of 75. And it actually does make George Washington pause and think about how this is going to all work, because we can't have a disruption in the discipline of the ranking system. And if somebody decides that these three people are going to be promoted, then you don't question that. In the winter and spring, this is the latest piece of documentation I have of the Huntingtons and how their merchant operation worked. In 1775, in like May, so basically the war has already started, although it becomes a Cold War for a while, until Bunker Hill. A shipment is coming in, the brig Britannia. This is a cargo inventory from 1775. And it is fascinating, and I still have yet to really analyze it, but it documents a shipment, what went down to the West Indies and what came back. And you can be sure that his trusted pilot, I think it was Jared Tracy, who would go to Grenada. This is a shipment to Grenada full of horses and cattle. The horses would be used to run the sugar mills, and the cattle, the barrels of meat and pork would be used to feed the enslaved people. But what's interesting is that they're also going down to collect on a debt. And I think Grenada at this point, I'm not sure, maybe someone in the audience knows, Grenada was a French-owned colony. It's run by it's a French colony, and he goes down to collect the debt, and the guy can't pay it, and so he pays them in enslaved humans. And I have to study it more. As you can see, it's not in the best condition, but it's in the, if you read it really carefully, he can't pay the debt's called, okay, we can't pay you, I'm going to send up 4 or 5 human beings to pay the debt. So it's proof there of how the system could and did work sometimes. And it's very cruel system, and it will break down during the war, but it's worthy of more study, of course. So again, this whole system of bringing down things to enable the sugar plantations, it's going to be halted by the war, period. And what Norwich will start to do is do what they do best. So they know how to provision these sugar islands. They also provision troops during the French and Indian War, for lack of a better term. It's called the 7 Years' War in Europe. And the colonial wars, there's more wars than just the French and Indian War, mind you. And there's evidence that the Huntingtons were involved in those provisioning of those militia troops from the 1749 to 1765. So they're expert provisioners, and that's just what they're going to do now that they can't trade too much. They're going to be provisioning the Continental troops. They're not the Continental Army yet, though, mind you, in 1775. They're still militia groups from all the different places in New England. And a Jedediah will be appointed to the War Council by the General Assembly of Connecticut. He is in lockstep with his kin and friend, Jonathan Trumbull, the wartime leader of Connecticut. The vessels are still operating, though things will become really tight, and privateering will start a little bit later. But we know what's going on up in Massachusetts. Some of the people that you might recognize on the War Council were people like Eliphalet Dyer, Matthew Griswold, Samuel Huntington, Benjamin Huntington, Joshua Elderkin, Jonathan Trumbull, and Jabez Huntington. Those are the people running the war and Connecticut's role in it. Sam Huntington was an enslaved person for Jabez Huntington. He is he's going to go off with Jedediah in his regiment in 1775, probably as a manservant, but also as a private. He's with the regiment until December 75. And then that's when George Washington and the Continental Congress decide that Black Americans are not going to be allowed to be in the Continental Army. He's almost sold. Can you believe that? He's fighting for his country. He's in service. And there's evidence in the Connecticut Historical Society that Jedediah talks to his father Jabez about maybe selling him up in Albany. Crazy. But that's the mindset. So it does not happen. He will end up being in the wars, doing other things for the Continental Army, and like everybody else, just doing everything they can to help George Washington and his army up in the Boston area. And he'll be rigging ships, and I think he was also a blacksmith. He's also a leader of the Black community in Norwich. He becomes a Black governor, just like his father, Boston Trotro. I'm still trying to work out his family tree, because I think that his mother was a woman named Jenny. It's very hard to track Black Americans' genealogy because they typically don't have a last name or surname. So it can be done, it can be inferred. More work needs to be done. I have a friend named Pauline Merrick she's a writer for the Atlantic Black Box website, and she has a great article about him called The Real Sam Huntington. Anyway, he will be freed during the war or just right after it, and he will die in Norwich. For some reason I get focused on hairdos.
Yeah.
These are some lovely pictures of Jabez's two daughters, surviving daughters. Betsy on the left with her post-Revolutionary War era hairdo, which is very Grecian, or harking back to the ancient Romans and Greeks with a loose hairdo. That's her husband, John Chester. He distinguished himself in the Revolutionary War. And on the right is Polly Huntington Strong, her sister. Her real name is Mary. And she would have been probably named after a Chester. Elizabeth Huntington on your left was named after Jabez's first wife, Elizabeth Backus Huntington. And in this picture is probably around her wedding. Mary was married in, I want to say, 1777. And you can see she's got the powdered high hairdo. So there are quite a few images of this family group, as you can see. The picture on the left was by Joseph Seward. And what else? So the women during the war are giving wagon deliveries up to the front, up to Roxbury and Cambridge, where their husbands are. You can be sure, there's Roxbury right here. Up here, you can see evidence of colonial forts, and then over here in Cambridge. So they're literally surrounding Boston, and of course, the British regulars are encamped in Boston. They're kind of trashing it, and they're dependent on all the ships that are in Boston. The harbor would have had hundreds of masts. It would have looked like a forest of masts in Boston Harbor, and that's the only way they can get food or supply ships. But of course, we know from Beverly history that the privateers are around trying to capture any British ship they can because they most desperately need powder, and they can't make it really that fast or as good as European powder. That's why when the French get in I think February of 78, that is probably one of the most important things, is they're going to be able to supply more gunpowder. All right, let's keep going. So, speaking of gunpowder, on June 17, 1775 is the Battle of Bunker Hill. And Jedediah decides to bring his wife Faith. For some reason, he's back in Norwich. See, the war hasn't really, it's only 2 months since Lexington conquered, and that was just a day event. But they're going up to have, excuse me, they will enact what's called the Siege of Boston. Meaning they're trying to push the British out just by not letting them go anywhere. That's why it's called the Siege of Boston. They're trying to starve out the British troops. And George Washington has not arrived yet. It's still a group of, they're still militia troops. It's not an army yet. There's no central, there is a command, but it's loosely based. It's all, it's not organized yet. That's what George Washington is gonna have to do, and it's gonna be tough. Jedediah decides to bring a few family members, including his wife Faith, up to the camps for a visit. Like, that's what they used to do. Let's go visit the guys at the camp. Why not? It's beautiful. It's June. We need to get out of Norwich and see that our family members are okay. Because his wife is starting to freak out, Faith. And I shouldn't use it that way. She's not yet, but they're very anxious, and we would be too. They don't know how this is going to turn out. The Redcoats are the most formidable army in all of the Western world right now. He decides that he's going to bring the ladies up to show them that everything's okay. Well, and there's a whole backstory to this story. Let's just say they arrive on that Sunday, and they probably came up to Roxbury, where her brother John Trumbull, remember the artist John Trumbull, is stationed here in Roxbury in one of these forts. And the British are attacking Charlestown because the colonials have erected a fort and a redoubt, and they're trying to take over Charlestown. So that battle is going to go on all day on a Sunday. They arrive in Roxbury over here. Abigail Adams is down here in Braintree, down here, okay? This is Boston, Charlestown, Roxbury. And they could probably see the battle. We'll never know for sure. If they had a spyglass, Roxbury, have you ever been there? It's hot, it's tall, it's high, especially where those forts were. So they might have been able to see the battle. They definitely could hear it, smell it, see the puffs of smoke. It was a series of, 3 or 4 or 5 charges with the British Army up to the redoubt. We all know that story. I saw the reenactment in Gloucester in June. It was incredible. So they're going to come up at the most inopportune time, and in some ways, his sister's decline will be attributed to this. Because now she really sees what war is like. This is Bunker Hill, by the way, arguably the most ferocious battle of the whole war. It's right up there at the top. And I'm not a military historian now, and the war will last 8 years, but it is ferocious. And it lasts all day in the hot sun, and they burn the town. See that in that excellent etching. John Trumbull wrote about years later in his autobiography how his very sensitive sister Faithy was really, she had incredible, we'll call it PTSD from that event. All right, they must have gone back to Norwich. Things kind of settled down. By late summer, the British fleet is always circling Long Island Sound. The men that we just talked about, they're all up in their camps in Roxbury and Cambridge. Jabez is the colonel of the Connecticut militia. He will eventually be in charge of the whole Connecticut militia, meaning the protection of Connecticut and its ports, including New London. He is the guy mentioned many times in the archives as trying to get powder. Everyone's trying to get powder. That's why the colonials had to jump and run from Bunker Hill. They ran out of powder. That is true. So he's also trying to figure out how to make more ordnance up in Salisbury. That's a town in Connecticut. He's going to the Lebanon War Council meetings with Jonathan Trumbull. That's where the Trumbulls live. And he's definitely in charge of the defense of Norwich and New London. And I think that is going to be the most stressful thing on his plate. Anyway, but for now we're just still in 1775. That is an image of Jonathan Trumbull's War Council. It says it's a storehouse. It's located in Lebanon, Connecticut on the Green. Faith Trumbull, that's his eldest daughter. She's the very smart, very educated first daughter of Jonathan and Faith Trumbull. A very loving, kind, caring person, described in her, the most we know about her is from her obituary. This is the house she grew up in, again, on the Lebanon Town Green. The War Council, it's hard to imagine because actually the house was moved not very far from where it is now. Lebanon is a quiet town now in a bucolic section of Connecticut. We have 11 surviving letters by her in various archives, plus 4 exemplary needlework pictures that sort of, they prove her education. And the thing to know about Faith was everyone loved her, very smart, but exhibits examples of anxiety early in her life that are documented in letters because she was sent up to Boston to get an education with Mrs. Elizabeth Murray. Has anyone ever heard of her? Okay, she was a female merchant in Boston on Cornhill Street. Fascinating person. And she taught Faith and other girls how to do really high-end needlework pictures, which I'm going to show you in a minute. But also obsessively religious. And her father was a taskmaster. He's a failed merchant. Things are probably stressful in their house at any and all times. I don't know. She's an overachiever, very smart. Will go to Boston 3 times when she's 10, 11, and 17 years old. Now, so when women got educated and they finished their education, they would have gotten a rudimentary education in their town. if their father, the merchant father, could afford it, he would send her up to Boston to get more education. Because if you can show prospective suitors that you can do this type of needlework and that your father can afford this type of silk and metallic threads and the design and the education that a woman named Elizabeth Murray can give your daughter, then why not? It's a way to ensure that your daughter's going to get an advantageous marriage. I just found this one on your left at historic Deerfield. It was just on the wall in a parlor in one of the houses there. That's it's a scene called the Death of Absalom. It's a biblical scene and many girls at this time period in the 1750s would do biblical scenes. Lois Breck, daughter of a minister, remember ministers and merchants, they're in their same class, they're the upper class. And she's doing this at the exact same time as Faith Trumbull, our girl from Lebanon and Norwich, eventually, because she's going to marry Jedediah in the future. But which one do you think is better? Well, I think the one Faith did is. No flies on Lois, but Faith was really good, and she fills up more of the canvas, and it's more lively and intricate. But there's also a girl that the Huntingtons are going to get to know, and the Trumbulls, who's also studying with these younger girls. This is Sarah Henshaw. She's 16 or 17. She's going to make an overmantle, or sometimes called a chimney piece. Okay, this is what she's capable of doing. They're all working on the same scene under Mrs. Elizabeth Murray. Fascinating. If you want to learn more about colonial girls' needlework, I suggest you try to find, you go to Marblehead Library and you get American Schoolgirl Needlework book by Betty Ring. When I talk about needlework in my book and my articles, I use her research as my go-to person. So, Sarah Henshaw, then that name will come back, because now we're flipping, we just went backwards to look at Faith's education, right? Highly educated, smart, thinker, overthinker. She does not like this war. Nobody does. And somebody like Abigail Adams, though, has plenty to do, because her husband is in Philadelphia at the Continental Congress. She has to run a farm by herself. You could argue that Faith doesn't have enough to do, but that would be like maybe getting ahead of myself. We don't know what happened, but she has a kind of a downward spiral through the late summer, and that is documented in her own letters. Those letters can be found at the Yale archives. I forget the name of their library, with the John Trumbull papers. Also with Jonathan Trumbull, there's a couple letters a friend of mine, Damien, just found in the Connecticut State Library, and I've seen one in private hands. She documents her own mental decline, and it becomes so bad that she has to be moved to Dedham to be near Jedediah. Dedham is on the Boston Post Road. It's the next town from Roxbury, and it's close to the Rhode Island and Connecticut border. She stayed in the Samuel Dexter house. This is a picture of it from the 19th century where a lot of alterations had happened to it, but it still stands in Dedham. It's right near the courthouse. She's going to stay with Joshua Henshaw, Sarah Henshaw's brother, and his wife. They are renting this house from a loyalist that had to flee. And it's probably the nicest house in Dedham. Jedediah brings Faith up to Dedham so he can give her better medical treatment or different medical treatment, because all the other treatments haven't worked, because she has a major depression going on. And she's staying with the Henshaws. They're trying to be nice to her and watch her. But unfortunately, she's not going to make it. And she dies by suicide on the morning after Thanksgiving on just November 24th. He thought she was fine or getting better, but she wasn't. And so it's just a terrible tragedy. It's tragic. It's documented actually in a journal by a man named Jabez Fitch, who was a lieutenant colonel in Jedediah's regiment, because everybody went to her funeral. In the middle of a war, we have all these officers from Jedediah's regiment that go to Dedham for her funeral and her burial, and it's incredibly sad, and they support him, and it's not hidden. Suicide by then was treated a little more humanely, and the excuse was that this was what God meant to happen, and it happened, but there's a huge 3-page long obituary in the papers that document what a great person she was. It's just fascinating. I am going to give a talk just about faith at the end of January at the Connecticut Museum of History and Culture. It will be online and part of their Lunch and Learn series if you want to learn more about her whole life. I like to focus more on her life, not on her death. But we do know a lot about her death because people wrote about it in their diary, as is Jabez Fitch did. Jonathan Trumbull only says, Faith died at Dedham Friday morning, 24th of November, 1775. What time do we have? Let's see.
Like about 10 minutes or so.
Okay. She's buried in Dedham at the Ames, I forget what it's called, the Ames tomb. And for all we know, she's still there. There's no evidence that she was ever moved. This is what it looks like. I have visited it, and I also spoke at Dedham about 5 years ago. I did an article, a full-blown article on faith. Well, 6 or 7 years ago at this point. So we covered that. The funeral at the Dexter House, everything is researchable. In the aftermath, the British tried to use Faith's death as propaganda, believe it or not. And they said that she died because she was a secret loyalist. They wrote this in their papers in early December. Secret loyalist, and didn't agree with her father and her husband's political views. Crazy. By this time, at the end of 1775, there is a law going into effect that absolutely no dealing or giving the enemy anything. You can't help them in the Long Island Sound. You can't help them navigate the Sound. You can't sell them food to make profit for yourself. They're just no dealing with the enemy. We still don't have the Declaration yet. It's still a murky time. It is a war, but the war will really kick in with the Declaration of Independence, because that really says we are done with you. We are going to fight to the end. So we're not there yet. We're still in 1775, but this family has had a terrible tragedy. Jedediah writes many letters about it in the weeks after. My tears must and will flow. He's communicating with his father, the governor. And Jabez is always on the lookout for powder, and George Washington is looking for blankets for the troops because the housekeepers won't give them up. And the troops are threadbare, and that is true. And that is going to continue into 1776. And this is the last overmantle Faith did. Faith did her own overmantles, just like Sarah Henshaw. And one thing I want you to notice, every piece of this canvas of silk, it's blue silk, is covered in stitch. You don't see any of the back of the canvas. There's maybe one little piece of blue somewhere in there. That looks like probably Lebanon up there. And she gave this to her eldest brother, Joseph. So with that, I think I'm finished. So I hope somebody has one question, maybe at least. Yes?
I have a comment and a question. My comment is, I really appreciate your use of enslaved people and enslaved workers.
Yeah.
And their humanity. I have great appreciation for that.
Thank you.
And my question is, one of the slides, I think it was in 1774 or around there, where you said that the towns were more instrumental than the founding fathers.
correct?
I'm wondering, do you mean like the people in charge of the towns where they're mayors and stuff, or do you mean like the people?
I mean, the committees, of course, the leaders of each town at this point they're the ones that are going to start a revolution, which is no easy thing to do.
The leaders of
The leaders of towns like Tryon, New York, and Norwich, Connecticut, and Beverly, Massachusetts, and Newburyport, Massachusetts, and Boston for sure. Boston, I mean, they're the most incensed. And Connecticut is always, the Norwich people kind of follow what Boston does. They're very connected to the Boston merchant group, not as much the New York. But what I mean by that, and this is again, like was talked about by this guy named Donald Johnson of North Dakota State University. He's writing a book about this. It's these little groups of Sons of Liberties and committees of correspondence that he digs more into them. We've all heard of the Sons of Liberty, but what are they really doing? They are organizing, they are storing powder, they're storing cannonballs in people's farms. That's why Lexington and Concord happens. They are getting ready because they know there's gonna be bloodshed. And the British are also, I mean, with the intolerable acts, they are just putting a vice grip on Boston. It can't last. The system can't hold. Something's gonna happen. And it's these committees of correspondence they're talking to each other. And I think after the Tea Party happens in December of '73, they're communicating about what the British are doing, where they are, and they're starting to also, everybody in every town is storing goods, provisions, and most importantly, powder and ammunition and weapons. So founding fathers, people like John Adams, George Washington, they don't really get going until 1776. And they sign off on the Declaration of Independence, which they could get hanged for. So someone has to start the war, but the founding fathers are gonna run the war. Any other questions?
How old was Faith when she died?
About 30, 32, yeah. Only had one son. Again, she definitely had she wasn't, I hate to use this word, Laurel Thatcher Ulrich coined this term, well-behaved woman. In a sense, she wasn't a well-behaved woman because she couldn't handle the war. God bless her. I mean, it was terrible. Abigail Adams did, but Abigail Adams was so busy, she didn't have time to think about what might happen. Plus her husband was in Philadelphia. Faith's husband, beloved husband, and they loved each other. She adored him and revered him. My dearest husband, Mr. Huntington, sometimes she would use. My dear sir. She just, we can empathize with her. We can understand her feeling. They don't know how it's going to turn out. But she just, it just didn't work out for her, unfortunately. And there was evidence of some suicide and depression in both of her family lines. Anyway, any other questions? Yes.
Can you talk about how the colonists in these different areas shared credible information with each other?
Yes, well, they were literally corresponding.
It's the letters.
It was letters, dispatches, people running on horseback.
Oh, okay.
They had an intricate network, and they got around. These people weren't just sitting in their houses thinking about everything. They were moving all the time. There's more movement than you think. But yes, they were literally corresponding with each other, which, again, this guy, Donald Johnson, talks about in his lecture about, he focuses on 3 different towns, Tryon, New York, someplace in Maryland, I can't remember, and just documents how they are communicating with each other about what the British are doing and how to prepare. And that's really what gets the revolution going, because the British start looking for this stuff. They know this is happening. They come out to Watertown first. There's a raid on Watertown. Then the big one is they're coming out to raid Concord and Lexington and Concord. And then the committees of correspondence, know that this is going to happen. So they get ready and they get their Minutemen ready, and we start the war.
And
I didn't, but
did the British tolerate newspapers published by the colonists?
that's a really good question. I don't know. I would think Boston probably wasn't printing newspapers once they had basically house rule in 1774. They're starving the British. Everybody's sending food. They're starving the Bostonians. Either you left if you could afford it, you moved outside of Boston. People like the Otis family, they have a house that still stands that's owned by Historic New England. They went to like Watertown. A lot of people went down to Norwich. Norwich was always a safe haven during this time period because it was 20 minutes away from Long Island Sound, so you were kind of safe from the British, because Connecticut would be attacked by the British 5 or 6 times with raids and burnings of towns, with the worst being the burning of New London in 1781. Terrible, under the leadership of Benedict Arnold, no less. So, yes.
What's the seed?
It's copied from the schoolgirls, and their teachers would copy mezzotints from Europe. And this is typical, the shepherdess. She's got her, I forget what they're called, but, staff. She's got her staff. We've got a guy with a bird in a bird cage. We've got the cows. I feel like this is Faith saying she's copying a picture from European books, mezzotints or books, engravings, but she's also adding her own things that are familiar to her.
There's a milkmaid.
There's a milkmaid, there's the fishing lady. We've seen the Boston fishing ladies. That's a common, picture for women to try to emulate on their these beautiful canvases. Only the wealthy women young girls would be allowed to do this. Your average American girl at this time would not be going up to Boston to get educated if she lived on a farm. Just ministers' daughters and merchants' daughters primarily. We see evidence of some type of industry going on here. Probably it could be a stocking factory, any kind of factory. And then maybe this is what the Lebanon meeting house looked like. Meeting houses never lasted very long, so like the one they have now is designed by John Trumbull, her brother, and it's brick. I don't like it. He did a better job as an artist. Any other questions? In the back.
2 questions. Question number 1 is, how did you become interested in this specific family? And question 2, this Huntington family, are they at all related to the Huntington family who were the starters of A&P, the grocery chain?
I don't know the answer to the second one. There's one family that I talked about last September that immigrates to America in 1633. And basically, most Huntingtons in America are descended from those 2 people, Margaret and Simon Huntington. They're a very large New England family, and they were lucky they had sons. They kept having sons. Some families died out, like the Hancock family. That family died out because they didn't have enough sons. You had to keep the name going, exactly. And they were pretty healthy there. Norwich was away from the yellow fever of the bigger cities like Philadelphia, New York, and Boston. Finally, I've been studying the Huntingtons for about 20 years. I actually am, related to them through my grandmother. She was a Huntington. And what I found fascinating about them is that my particular line of Huntingtons, including the Jabez Huntington family, they stayed in their town till 1893. When my great-grandfather, and he was 6, they moved to Washington, D.C. But they stay in Norwich. You stay in a town because you don't need to move yet. People usually move and immigrate because they have financial straits. But this family will go through a lot of financial straits. And I hope you come and join me maybe next summer if Beverly needs me to speak. I will be going over 1776 and how they are going to be provisioning the Continental Army and how stressful that's going to be for them. because Washington cannot get Continental Congress to help him that much. It's just, it's too brand new. So, anyway, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate you all being here, and it makes me happy and gets me out of my office. Have a